researcher, a Fulbrighter with us in design and an interdisciplinary artist who's researching the current state of Hanji, Korean handmade paper. And you're in for a treat. Some of us got to see her shorter presentation down at the spring workshop in Jeju-do recently. And based on what she's done already with this room, I think you know you're in for a treat. Her topic is Spider Paths on the Paper Trail, Contemporary Possibilities for Hanji. So Aimee, take it away.
Thank you so much. I wanted to just start out by thanking Fulbright for this really incredible, life-changing opportunity. When I was down in Jeju, we were doing presentations, and one of the other researchers was asking about the personal background behind our research, and he kept on asking everyone the same question, and then I decided to just respond in my lecture, and so I'm doing kind of the same thing tonight, and I just wanted to start by giving you, before I give you the history of Hanji, giving you my history of how this person ended up with Hanji. So I was born to Korean immigrants in New York, and I grew up in the greater New York area, and I was always really interested in art. So this is something I actually drew in Korea. I was also really drawn to music, so I started first on piano, and then moved to violin, which became my primary instrument. I'm also a performance artist. I'm very interested in textile and fabric, string, and I'm a paper maker. So the paper making started when I was in graduate school, and it was just something that I really fell in love with. It was about the water, and it was about repetitive motion, it was about extreme physical labor, and I started after grad school going out, and everywhere I could find plants to make paper. So that was in Nebraska, this is Wyoming, this is cattail from Wyoming. I would go out and harvest, and I was trying to figure out, this is sagebrush in Wyoming, in the hills, making cattail paper, and I would just try to figure out ways to, this is Mexico, river lilies, to make art that didn't impact the environment negatively. Again, Mexico, river lilies, and I was just drawing, making paper with a mobile unit and drawing on the go. I found these correlations with my work. This is my work, and then strangely enough with Korean traditional art, like there are rainbows on the bottom of this, and it just kind of freaked me out a little bit. But so this is the process of me making my thesis for my MFA that I had gotten 3 years ago, and it was a large piece that I meant to be, it was a self-portrait, and I was basically trying to build a brick wall out of paper. So this is a Western style sheet formation, and in the process of doing this, I realized that the only Eastern style formation that was going on in the States was mainly all Japanese paper making. And I knew that there was I had figured out early on that there was a history of Korean paper making through China, but I just couldn't find anyone in the States who knew anything about it or could teach me, or there were no facilities. So I applied for the Fulbright to do more research on Hanji directly here, because I knew that there were people making, there are still people making Hanji here. And there was one woman in the States who came here over 10 years ago, Aimee, and she studied with the Chang family out in Gapyeong, and I was very lucky to, through many routes, find them again and find my teacher, who is here today, and I'm so honored that he was able to make it. And I was able to spend a month out in the countryside in January, the coldest month here, and learn how to make paper. And when I was in touch with Lynn, she was saying that it was really magical for her to be with him and his family and see him realize that his father, who was an intangible property holder of paper making, a third-generation paper maker, when he realized that his father could be more than just his father or a father, but so much more to other people in the world. And so she's no longer doing this work because she had an injury, and so I felt that it was appropriate for me to continue her work through the same teachers. So this structure ended up being 14 feet tall, backlit, and I did a performance where I drew comics on extra bricks for other people. And so it was all about this dialogue of being inside and then receiving people from the outside, and also about walls that aren't really able to keep you contained, and you think that you protect yourself, but really it's just, it's paper. But at the same time, paper is very strong, which is something that a lot of people don't realize. But in the course of doing this, when my mother came to the opening, she looked at the structure and she said, that looks exactly like that observatory in Korea, which is very, very famous structure. And as soon as she said that, I ran to the internet to look at the picture again, because I hadn't seen it since I was a teenager and saw it in Korea. And I'd actually made an artist book about it in my undergrad work, and I saw it and I started crying, because I realized that somewhere it was the same. There was some kind of inspiration that came. So I'm very fortunate to be here in Korea and to be able to be making art and studying Hanji. So I was just going to give very, very, very brief history. Papermaking started in papermaking. The records show that papermaking started in China. There was a man who was actually in charge of creating a technique that was more useful than what had been going on in the past. And then that moved, it eventually moved west, but first it moved east. So it went to Korea, where it was developed to a very advanced level. And then there was a Buddhist monk who traveled to Japan in about 610 and brought techniques to Japan, where they then developed it further in their own manner. But the Korean method is very similar to the Japanese method, but there's one small difference that I really want to look in, which is the style of sheet formation. And because Korea is such is this culture that's it's an incredibly literate culture, that there is a culture of philosophy and thinking, and so they needed books and they needed paper to be able to make these books and print these books. There was a very strong printing culture. Korea is the first country that developed metal movable type far before Gutenberg did, and so that eventually turned into a paper culture in Korea, where it was just part of daily life, and people would use paper to make their clothing and their shoes and objects, and not just their books. And so but then what happened was during the Japanese invasion, a lot of the paper makers were taken away, and then also around that time, and before then, a lot of Western paper-making mills started up, so just using wood pulp and bleaching it, using chemical processes, and so Hanji really started to go downhill. Before then, it had been basically the most famous paper in the East, in East Asia, and used as a tribute to China. Chinese painters really valued Korean paper, Hanji, over anything made in their country, and Japan did as well. So the issue became that Buddhist monks were employed then. They were forced by the government to make incredible amounts of paper for tributes, and it was really difficult for them to continue to do their own religious work. But that religion actually was a big reason that paper was so necessary in Korea, because of the scriptures and also because of their worshiping practices. And a lot of the flowers that you see now used to be made out of silk, but there was a time when they switched them all to paper. And so we're very thankful to that religion for continuing the culture of Hanji. And so I wanted to also talk then about, to finish up, so Hanji then started going downhill in 1945. Starting there, a lot of traditional Korean culture was pretty much eradicated. And so when you demolish Korean homes, traditional Korean homes, and you build just apartment buildings, Western style houses. You don't need Hanji anymore for the flooring, for the wallpaper, for the windows, for the doors. And a lot of that paper culture that just disappeared. Paper makers went out of business, and then the most recent issue now has been that paper makers, a few of them went to China and started opening factories, and because the cost of labor and materials is so cheap, now what we're getting is is just too much competition from the Chinese market, but it's, the quality is getting better, but it's not the same as paper that's made here. So it's a concern that there are people who are working on that right now. The Ministry of Culture is funding a project to go and collect samples from the remaining paper makers left, and trying to figure out a way to make standards for Hanji, and possibly figure out a way to differentiate it from the imports that are coming in. So the raw material for making Hanji comes from the mulberry tree, and it's known as the taknamu in Korean, and it's a really strong, hardy plant, and it grows really well on hillsides. It grows all over the place. There was a point in Korean history when the government actually they just mandated that trees would be grown all over the place because they wanted a lot of paper to be made. This is at a temple that I had come to. This is in Wonju at a famous paper mill, and they had just gotten a shipment of taknamu, and the owner was complaining to the guys. He was like, "This is so much less than last year," and and this is where my teacher and I went to harvest trees, and I did a very bad job. He cut most of them down. He just took the pictures, so it looked like I was doing something. But and we cleared that whole hillside along the train tracks, and then we went and stripped the bark. And in the past, the bark would be stripped in the community, and everyone would know when to do that because you strip the bark and you could take the inner part home for firewood. So this is in the summer, another paper maker down south, and I just wanted to note that paper making is very tied to agriculture and the land, and these are the places that paper making really thrived in Korea. And you find mulberry trees where you find other kinds of agriculture and farming. And Hanji was always made in the winter season when the farming season was over, because the farmers would have something else to do. And these pepper plants were in the vicinity of the taknamu, and then this is back at the factory where I was working in the winter, and they have an agreement with a nearby farm where they clear out their dead pepper plants after the season is over, and we took these all out of the field and we trucked them back to the paper mill so that we could burn them to make ash, because you need that to cook the fiber to prepare it for paper making. And so the ash then, it's a process that a lot of people don't use anymore because it's just so labor intensive. But I just wanted to show that kind of life cycle of these trees growing in cultivated areas and also wild, and that it's really important to. I think that something that people forget is that it's not just about trying to save Hanji or caring about paper or the trees, but also about the communities that they live in. And so looking at Korea and the way that the rural areas they're just dying because everyone's been going to the cities. And when I went to go visit this one paper maker, it was really sad just to see there were just no young people, and there were just very few people in general. And that used to be that area in general actually used to be very famous for making paper for flooring, and now there's one paper maker left. So I wanted to show a video actually of that paper maker. So this is when I went to visit him in the summer, and his name
Where
is
is this?
Uryong-gu. So it's pretty far south. It's very far south, and Shin Hyun-se is the paper maker, and he provides conservation grade Hanji, excellent paper. I also just wanted to mention that my advisor, Ho Kyung Kim, is in the back as well, and she was the one who brought me to this paper maker, and she has been really vital in making connections for me. And even before we met, I just made more contact with her before I got here. So I'm very thankful to her as well. This is a really hot day. This is actually not the way you carve it, but he wants to show us. We hiked up through fields and in the hills to see these trees. This is very labor-intensive work that women do, where you have to scrape. Basically, this is actually from that very tree, and you can see there's white fiber on the inside, but then on the outside there's the bark that's brown, and we call that the black layer, and then the inner layer is green. So you have to get rid of those layers, and the only way you can do it is by scraping it by hand. So here he's making water from ashes. There are 6 different kinds of ashes that were used in traditional Korean papermaking. That doesn't happen as much anymore because there's a lot less farming. It's harder to get those materials, and it's so much labor just to get the plants and then burn them and then make the ash. So he cooks them in this large steam cooker in this cauldron, and then after the fiber is rinsed, the women come into the picture again, and they pick every single piece by hand. Sometimes you have to actually go through it 2 or 3 times, depending on how much bark is left. Depends on how well you scraped in the beginning. This is very much a process of, if you do the hard work in the beginning, it pays off in the end. And if you don't do it in the beginning, you'll see it. It'll just get worse and worse. It'll make more work for you in the end. But traditionally, you beat fiber by hand. So this is also very labor intensive. But it's the best way to keep the fibers long, but to separate them. And this prepares them, it prepares all the fiber to go into the vat. The cooking method removes all the impurities, all of the non-cellulose elements from the tree that you don't need. This is hibiscus root, which makes this really mucilage that you cannot make any Eastern style paper without. So this is the technique that I came here to learn, and this is unique to Korea. So you see he does a dip from front to back and then goes side to side, and there's nothing sitting on top of the screen. With most other paper making across the world, there's an extra frame that contains the slurry, the water and the pulp, but it's different in Korean paper making, and so it makes for a different kind of paper. It makes for a very strong paper. This motion of letting it go from side to side lets the fiber extend out to its fullest length, and that makes it the strongest. It's the strongest when it's spread out like that rather than bunched up. So after every sheet, you form every sheet, you have to place it onto a stack of the other sheets so that you can then use the screen again. That log was used in the past. Not all paper makers use it now, but it was used in the past because screens were much rougher and larger then. So air bubbles were a problem. He works pretty much alone. He has 2 women working for him, and his wife helps him out, but this is pretty much one family operation. His children are studying abroad, but he's been making paper since he was a teenager, and actually is also friends with my teacher's family, because pretty much all the Hanji makers that are left in Korea today all have some kind of connection to each other. So this is just a quick look into the formation method that's used in Japan, and also used in Korea. And it was originally called sang, as in a pair, or twins, like twins. Because if you made paper like this, you could actually then put a line in between and you'd end up 2 sheets of paper with the same effort that you made to make just one. So you can't do that with the traditional Korean style paper making. And then after you finish making this whole stack of sheets, then you have to press all the water out of it. In the past, you would weight it with rocks. You would just keep putting big rocks on top of it and wait for a few days, and the water would slowly seep out. Nowadays, even people who do super traditional paper making will use a hydraulic jack press because it just makes your life a lot easier. It doesn't compromise the integrity of the paper. So, but even this, you have to make sure that enough water comes out of it so that you can dry it properly. This was done in the summer, so it was hot enough that they would dry pretty quickly, and they did it on boards. And these boards, they put 2 sheets of paper on each side of the board, so each board will dry 4 sheets. And again, traditionally the men form the paper, they make the paper, and the women dry the paper. And this was a big reason that I had such a hard time finding someone who would agree to teach me to make paper, because I was a woman. So they said, well, you can't make paper because you're not strong enough. And as a woman growing up, when I did in America, I was really angry about that. And so it took a while for me to get over that. And luckily I found a teacher who was okay with me being a woman and wanting to learn how to make paper. This final action is also unique to Korean paper making. Bochin, it's a kind of manual pounding, and you're pounding the paper to compact the fiber, to smooth it out, and to give it some sheen. This makes it the ink bleed less. So if you want to use it for calligraphy or for Eastern paper painting techniques, it works very well for that. Of course, it's another huge extra amount of labor. So after showing you, I respect him so much, and so I'm a little embarrassed to do this, but now I just want to show you what it looks like when a novice makes paper. So this is, again, as I said, it's pretty close to Seoul. It's actually one of the closest paper mills to Seoul, and at Hanji in Hapyeong. And they have a vat dedicated to doing this webad paper. And somehow I was able to shoot all this and also be in front of the camera at the same time. But I went, and it was really cold, and I was really scared, and I didn't think that I was going to be able to handle it at first, because my teacher was showing me, all like hibiscus roots, and he said they work best frozen, and you would just feel this chill come right off, and I was like, I can't do it, and you can't tell, but paper, Hanji is always made in ice cold water, so you use your bare hands, and the water is really, really cold. So when you're doing that, and it's already it's dead of Korean winter, it's just, and all the floors are frozen, and you just have this little heater next to you. It just, you think that you can't do it, but once you start it actually, you get into a rhythm, and it's fine. So this is, again, that hibiscus root. You need to get all that mucilage out, and then strain it, and then eventually you'll add it to the vat. But first you have to get the trees, which we did, and then you have to steam them so that you can remove the outer bark, again, this bark, from that inner core. So you have to strip it and then scrape all that again. And this actually, I think this was the worst part. This was really, really hard on the arm and the shoulders. And then you leave it out to dry, and also for the sun to bleach it. Sometimes they used to bleach it in snow when there was snow. And like I said, you have to cook it in this alkaline solution, because basically the tree has elements that are acid, gums, pectins, lignins, waxes, and you need to get rid of all of that. Here they use a beater that's specially designed. I've never seen a beater like this before. and with specially designed knives so that it does not cut the fibers too short. And then there's a process of agitating the vat. So I developed a lot of upper body strength this month. So this screen is used, you make paper on both sides of the screen. I don't know how clear, I tried to make it clear in the video, but so you first make it on the first side, so you saw the first dip front to back and then side to side. You control, depending on, you have to be able to feel from the vat how much fiber is left, how big you want the sheets. And then you can see that there are these guides, these metal guides, so that I made sure that they all go down straight. And then you just snap the front of the screen, and then the paper will be released from the screen. And then you put down a thread every other sheet. The thing with Hanji that's so different from other kinds of paper making is each sheet is actually made out of 2 sheets of paper. So that's the little pot of hot water that just to make sure you don't get frostbite. And they use that also in Japan. So you put the screen down, and then now I'm going to put it down and make the paper on the other side of the screen. And then there's this flipping method. And so what happens is that when you take a dip from front to back, no matter how skilled of a paper maker you are, the sheet's always a little bit thicker in the front than the back. So to even that out, you flip, the 2 sheets will be flipped so that the front end is on one side with the other sheet and the front end is on the back side, so that it then becomes an even sheet, which is why they call it moon sun paper, because they fit together perfectly, and that you need both to make one strong sheet. This gives it the strength that a lot of other Eastern papers don't have, and it also removes grain direction. So the drying method, you saw in the other video that they were doing it on wooden boards, which they would, in the past they would do that and they just leave it out in the sun, but then people developed this method of using heated steel panels, metal panels. Here they use water and steam with a boiler that's fired on the outside, but there are other, I'll show you pictures later of other ones that are just actually fired, so wood fire. So once the paper, all the water's been pressed into the paper, you separate each sheet, and each thread will tell you, it'll separate each 2 sheets, and then you have the 2 sheets together, and then you have to brush it up against this steel panel that's heated. And you have to do it so that you don't get any wrinkles or air bubbles, and you have to do it fast enough that it dries evenly. And because you can see it, you can see every single error that you've ever made in the process of making paper in the final sheet. You can see if you made mistakes when you were forming it, you can see it if you made mistakes with this brush, you can see it if you dropped water on it while you were putting it down. Everything shows. So this dries very quickly, and then you take the sheets off, and then again here, this is a different kind of machine, or it's the same machine, but it's a different, they built it themselves. What I think is so special about my teacher's mill is that they have come up with ways to build their own machines to suit their needs. So this is Tochim again. This is not my soundtrack. My teacher had turned on the radio that day for me to work, and but I really can't. I can't. There's no way for me to express how thankful I am to him and to his whole family. His mother fed me 3 meals a day, 6 days a week. And his father also would come, whenever he knew I was making paper, he would come in to make sure I wasn't doing anything wrong. And his brother taught me how to dry the paper, and his daughters were also around all the time, and it was a really, really special experience where you could see it was truly this huge family effort. His wife runs their shop out in Sabon, and they're totally committed to making Hanji and keeping it alive. So that was, now that you saw the novice, I wanted to show you just a few more experts. I was trying to find the best paper makers that I could find who still did this web style of formation. So the first is my teacher's father, Chang Yong-hun, and he is intangible property holder, cultural property holder for papermaking in Gyeonggi-do province, and he is in his 70s. He's been making paper since he was 17, and he has this really beautiful fluid style. And you can see he could just control it so that it stays on top, and then he lets it flow over. This again is the same paper maker that I just showed you earlier, Shin, and he has also had a lifetime in paper making. And his, I go with Changjibang, they supply a lot of artists with paper and a lot of products for art makers. This paper maker does conservation grade paper. And then Chang Ung-yeol in Wonju, he does a lot of color Hanji, which is very popular in Wonju. That's kind of their specialty. And this is it was actually at the Wonju Hanji Festival last fall. So this is not colored Hanji, but you can see that his technique is very different, very vigorous. He was the one who took one look at me and said, "You can't do it," and I wouldn't have been able to do it that way. It's true. And then finally, my teacher at the same that as his father, and he originally started working for his father, and he said, I'm going to give it 5 years, and then I'm out. And over 20 years later, he's still in the business, and he's doing an incredible job trying to innovate ways to create more products that are relevant to people's lives with Hanji. So, and then I wanted to also talk about something that people forget, because it's so easy to get caught up in how Hanji is disappearing and how the Hanji makers are disappearing and they can't make money, but the tools that you need to make Hanji are also very important, and there are still people, there are only 2 people left making the screens. So that bamboo screen, there are only 2 people in Korea left making those, and that's a major issue because paper makers can't make paper without those screens. This is a workshop of the intangible treasure, the intangible cultural heritage in Jeonju, and he actually was a paper maker as well. He makes his own tools. These are rocks that he carved himself, and so this is bamboo. These are the nodes in the bamboo that you need to cut out. These are the pieces of the bamboo that actually work for the screening, and then of that, these are the ones that you have to throw out. This does not work. You only use the outer part of the bamboo plant, and then you put it into these splints that end up being this final sheet, this final screen. And that screen, I just wanted to show quick. That screen is, of course, made with a lot of labor. And so I went to visit him in Jeonju. So he gets his bamboo from a famous forest in Korea, in Tamyeon, and you have to soak after he's already gotten the bamboo and cut out the nodes, cut out the outer part, and now he's by hand he's just cut the tips so that, and then soaked it, and then he can eventually splice them all out. And then after doing that, he pulls them through this amazing tool. It's very simple, and so this makes the pieces cylindrical and smooth, and so that they're ready to weave into these screens. His wife works for his wife, and then there's another woman who works for him, and his son is now training to be his disciple and to continue the tradition. And so again, this used to be done, this is done now with nylon with fishing line, but it used to be done with silk that was treated with persimmon dye or horsehair. And in that way, of course, in that way, the tradition actually, this is my opinion, but it makes sense to use nylon nowadays than to go back and do this labor-intensive process of tying horsehairs together. But but there is a lot of concern about the fact that there are not many people left making these screens, and not a lot of paper makers left who know how to repair their own screens. So that's something just to keep in mind there. I did meet an anthropologist at 전북대학교 who has recorded an interview with him and is working on trying to keep alive these traditions. So I wanted to now look at the different crafts that are involved with, that are related to Hanji. And I had come wanting to not just learn how to make paper, but also learn different things that I could do with the paper. And I didn't think that I was going to be able to learn this because I just didn't think I would meet someone who would be, I knew it would be hard enough to find a Hanji teacher, but then when we were building this wood fire to steam the trees in the dead of winter, we were talking, and my Hanji teacher had taught me some of this chisun technique, and this is a noyoke, which is where you twist paper into cords and then you weave it into objects. And he said, I can introduce you to my teacher, and then from there it went. So now I'm studying with Sohan 선생님, who is also here today, and I'm very honored that he's here. And he is also a third generation Chisung master. He learned from his father, who learned from his grandfather. And this technique, like in his words, you can make anything. You can make anything. He said, you can make a person out of Hanji with this process, and he could. I can't yet. I can make the cord, and that's about as far as I've gone. I've made he's developed this way actually of taking two strips of Hanji and then weaving it into cord. In the past, you used to just take one strip between your two little fingers and do this, and it would take so much longer and the cords weren't as strong, but he figured out a way to do this based on the way that rope is made. And you can see he does it on top of this this cloth napkin, because there's all this dust that comes out of Hanji, which is not bad for your health, but it's just a little annoying. And so he has this little vacuum cleaner at home that he's constantly running. So once you make the cords, then you can create these objects, and this is the piece that he's working on, but that he taught me, and this is a chamber pot. So in the past, when women were carried around in those, I don't remember what they're called, but they're carried around in these things, and they have to use the bathroom on these long trips. And they don't want the men carrying to hear them use the bathroom, because these used to just be made out of clay, or but if you make them out of paper, then it doesn't make a sound. And so it's very discreet, and it's very light and portable. And this is actually not finished yet. It's covered in right now. It's covered in sticky rice flour paste. But later it needs to be lacquered. So lacquering is a whole other animal. So we're going to have to deal with that soon. I have a great fear that I will have an allergic reaction to lacquer. So I've been kind of staying away from it. But actually both my Chisung and my Hanji teachers are expert lacquers. They're good at lacquer, and my Hanji teacher at his factory also has a space to lacquer objects. So that is going to be, before I leave, we're going to give it at least a few coats. So these are a few objects that I was working on. These are the cords that you make, and I have some of them here. And then the process of weaving is very labor intensive. And the first day that I went, my teacher started bleeding, and I got so scared, and I thought, if third generation master is bleeding, then what's going to happen to me? Like, I'm just going to lose my fingers. And I haven't bled yet, but a lot of the skin is starting to fall off. And he would warn me, he said, you can't do too much in one day because you'll just get so tired and you'll get really sick. So, but at the same time, it is, as you can see, it's the kind of thing that requires this kind of obsession. So you put it down and then you can't stop, and so you pick it up again, and the next thing you know, it's 2 in the morning. You've been doing it for 14 hours. You can't feel your fingers anymore. But then you end up with objects like this, and then it's all kind of worth it. So in the past, this was used to make, like I said, all sorts of things. And there was a great story that I had heard about in the past. Paper shoes were all the rage. This black one is lacquered. These are the ones that my teacher has made. So this was what I want it to look like in the end in terms of the lacquering. So, so they used to make shoes out of paper, and it became this real big trend in Korea. This is long, long ago. And so people would actually, there were thieves who would go and to break into homes, and they would steal books. They would steal books so they could tear out the paper and then weave it and then spin it and then make shoes. And the government said, people, you have to stop stealing books. You know, it's not worth it for these shoes. But I've also been really lucky to meet a dyeing teacher. I say that every time, and my sister says, you have to call it natural coloring because it sounds like your teacher is dyeing. But this is my, so I, through a friend and then another artist, I was able to meet my dyeing teacher, and he and his wife run a business in studio and a business in Insadong, and they're also here with us today, and I'm so honored that they've been able to make it, and they both have this beautiful space, and you just never think that you could find a space like this. This is persimmon dye, and this with an iron mordant makes this kind of color, and they've been teaching me, this is safflower. Every time I go, I learn a different dye, and then they let me, I've been dyeing silk, but they also let me bring my own Hanji. So all of the colored sheets here have been dyed at their studio. And this is just kind of a sampling of onion skins of different materials and colors that I've been using, but it's just kind of the tip of the iceberg. I'm always amazed every time I go, because there's always more. I always think, okay, I've learned 10, there can't be much more, but there's always more. This is indigo, which is very difficult to work with, and this is all Hanji. These are cloves. This smells really great. And so this again is in keeping with my interest in making work that has less of an impact, negative impact on the environment. This is cochineal. Those were little dried up bugs, actually. This is homo. It's a sapin wood. It's related to Brazil wood, and it makes this really gorgeous red color. And then this is a sheet of Hanji that's been dyed with that, but when it's wet, you can see, I have this piece actually here. It's very different, wet and dry. But and then I wanted to talk a little about what you do, with Hanji. I was talking to a friend, and he was saying, we just think of paper as paper and not as art itself. It's just something that you use to write on. Or so the first few images, these are Hanji that's used. This is in traditional screens for paintings. Hanji is used for hinges. These are traditional books. This wood panel is used to rub with a rock on paper to make these patterns, and this is indigenous to Korean bookmaking. These are natural dyes, and this is all done at the Training Center for Traditional Culture in Puya, the Korean National University of Cultural Heritage, and they repair books like this, old documents. The dyes are used to match the colors of old documents. This is a sample of a Buddhist book. This is the booth at a Persimmon Festival that I went to last fall of Yeongdam Sunim, and she is a Buddhist nun, and she had been making paper and using natural dyes for a very long time. And I was supposed to study with her, but she no longer has a mill, So she just makes artwork, but she doesn't make paper anymore. And I wanted to go through some artists. This is Chung In-cha, who is also here with us today, and this is a book that she's made out of Hanji that's mimicking onion skins about the human nature. And this is also a book that's made out of Hanji. And I wanted to show pieces that are not so overtly like, this is Hanji, but that it's something you can use. She's a printmaker, she's an illustrator, she is a book artist, and she uses it in this really beautiful, subtle way. This is where I'm going to have to look at some notes. This is an artist that I met in Seoul, Lee Chang-soo, and he makes these huge panels, and if you look at Hanji, if you look at the pulp, he takes the pulp before it's formed into sheets, and then he just uses like an awl, and he makes these little points, and he creates all these textures, and again, incredibly labor intensive. This is a very famous artist. Chung Kwang-young, and he has kind of become a big hit in America, and or actually abroad. And he takes Hanji and he uses it to wrap pieces of wood, and then he ties them together. He uses Hanji cord to wrap old Hanji around wood, and then he creates these kind of like paintings. He has a painting background, so he also makes large sculptures. This is an artist that was in the same exhibit, and it's just on Hanji, but they're actually characters that make these. Kim Hae-gon 선생님, he is in Jeju, and he's working with making Hanji out of different products like mandarin peels. This is Oh Myung-hee, and she is professor at Sangwon University, and she does these tapestry-like Hanji pieces. This artist does book arts and printmaking, and is also very active. Im Young-hil, and this was at an exhibit that I just went to recently in Gwangju, in Gyeonggi-do. Ham Yun's chic, and I really like how this artist uses the different textures with Hanji. Ham Suno, again using this very simple, the kind of layering technique with taknamu, and then this is a casting technique by Won Woon-ja, and then sewing. Lee In-kyung, and she also does her own dyeing. Those are all dyes that she does herself. And then finally, Im Young-jo, and again, similar to that early artist where you are making these textures out of Hanji. So I think that there's really a lot that's going on with using Hanji in contemporary art. I think there's still so much more that can be done, and I think that it's too easy to kind of pigeonhole people and say, this is a Hanji artist, and then they end up in this kind of craft category, which has been a real, that I think actually will be a debate forever with artists versus craftspeople, and I think it's kind of sad because it prevents people from getting the kind of attention that they should be getting, but there are a lot of skills that both groups have, and I think that it would be really great if they worked together instead of constantly putting each other down. But that's just, sorry, I shouldn't have come here. I just wanted to do also this final. I want to talk about fear. You know, I was talking about how it was so cold, and I was so scared about making paper because it was so cold. And this is on the way. I would walk to work to the factory, and it was snowing a lot in January. The windows were all frozen over like this. So when you want to make paper, you cannot be afraid of cold. You can't be afraid of heat or water. This is Wonju Hanji. This is, I was telling you about the drying techniques, is Andong Hanji. They use the wood-fired panels, as does Wonju Hanji. and they're making black paper. And coincidentally, I went to Wonju Chonthong Hanji, just very close to them, and they were also making black paper that day, and also used that wood-fired heating panel. And then here again, you can't be afraid of working in the heat, in the sun, in the summer, even though it was traditionally done in the winter, and you can't be afraid of labor. And I think this is the biggest thing. It takes so much labor. They call Hanji sometimes pikchi, as in saying that it takes 100 strokes, 100 touches by the human hand to make Hanji. And my teacher was saying to me in the winter, he said, actually some guy counted, it's not 100, it's more like 70 something. But it's still a lot. It's still an enormous amount of labor, and I'm just really interested in that. And I think that that's why so many Hanji artists then take this labor-intensive material and then they add more incredible amounts of labor to make these really beautiful pieces. But what I think actually would be a great thing for the future of Hanji is to look at not the way that you can just turn, like here I wanted to show you like all the different paper that you can make, but not to live in this bubble of like this is like paper world, and I could live in a paper house with paper floors and walls and windows and wear paper clothes and wear paper shoes and eat it off of paper plates. And I think it's not about that, but it's about making paper relevant in our lives, and especially today in a world like today where we so often, like I was telling my teaching teacher, I went to my hairdresser the other day and I was working on a piece and it wasn't even done. I think I had like this much of it. And all the people there were like, what is that? And so there is still this strong draw that people have to these handmade objects. And so if there is a way to create more relevance for paper in our daily lives, and it doesn't have to be so overt, then I think that that's a way to continue to ensure survival for Hanji, not just here, but then abroad. So I just wanted to end with this image of laundry. And so this is paper, actually, I was making in Mexico, and you dry it on the line with your socks and your underwear. And again, it's just part of your life. It doesn't have to be this valuable thing that you can't touch, or that not everyone, I think that everyone should be able to have it in their homes. And the beauty of, I was thinking about it today, I was thinking, we're so used to this, and this is really cold, and it's just, it doesn't do anything for me. And the worst thing about this kind of paper is it gives you paper cuts. But you don't get paper cuts with Hanji, so I actually think that I've run really long on time. So I had wanted to show you I had wanted to do some demos, but it might be better for me to end. And I am happy to take questions, and also for people to look around. I don't have time to explain everything, but I will explain that pretty much all the sheets are made all the colored sheets are made at Pai Changjibang, and then that I dyed. This sheet, my teacher has lacquered, but all the rest are sheets that I've made, except with the exception of these. I had another teacher teach me how to make these patterns. And so there are more objects here to look at, and I brought all my text references. So you're welcome to look around afterwards. And I'd be happy to take questions now. Yes?
You mentioned the artist in Chichigo was using orange peels. How did that work out?
It's actually been working out really well. He has a patent, and he is the first person to be making Hanji. He started with actually different percentages, so it's going from 5% to 10%, all the way up. He's gotten up to 95% peel, and then combined with taknamu. And he basically he was thinking about the environmental impact of this island that produces so many mandarins, and then the peels are like 70,000 tons are dumped into the ocean as waste. So he wanted to figure out a way to use them. He was first looking for ways to use it for dye, and then his wife said, well, you could actually just make paper out of it. And he sends the raw materials to Jeonju. He has a relationship with a paper mill there, and I visited that paper maker, and they will they will boil the, all the materials and then go with the specifications that he asks for and make, in combination with Takano, make the different samples, and actually the Jeju, like the government, the provincial government has been funding this so that they can create it as kind of like as a Jeju product. So he said that it can be really tough, like when it gets to 95%, it ends up being almost like leather. But I've seen the samples, and the ones that are less so are it's just like any other paper that you'd see, more decorative though. Yes, Helena.
The bamboo weaving reminded me of lace making. That's a flipping
Yeah,
motion.
uh-huh.
It's just like making lace. It's an incredible idea to think that a bamboo screen is actually a piece of lace in disguise.
Yeah, and he also does when he has time, he does a lot of decorative screening work where he uses colored thread and he creates patterns and images inside the screens. But yeah, it's a really, I went with two anthropologists, and one is from Arizona by way of Germany, and he said, that looks like the method of making something else. And so they are all connected, I think, all these handcrafts and crafts related to making objects for everyday life. Yes?
This has been tremendously exciting, I think, because your excitement is contagious. But the question that I kept on asking myself is probably one that you're asking yourself, is how do you see yourself making use of this knowledge 10 years from now?
10 years from now? Well,
5 years.
10 years. The dream that I came with, and it's still a dream that I have, was to come here and learn everything I could and then go back to the States and find either a university or, if I can't, or some kind of sponsoring organization. If not, find the funding myself to find a site to build a paper mill, or at least a teaching facility, to be able to, I've already ordered for my teacher my own screen and the wooden mold that goes under it to take back, to be able to teach it, and also then find funding to bring my teachers from Korea to the States, because so few of them have been, actually, I mean, the only person that I know of who had gone to the States in the 80s, he passed away very suddenly and tragically, and he wrote this book before he passed away, and his widow still works now in Wonju Hanji, making paper, but no one has really gone into the international field in terms of really, I mean, it's one thing to lecture, but it's another thing to actually create a place where you can make it, and I think that you can't know unless you see it, and then once you actually make it yourself, how hard it is, but then how wonderful it is. So the dream is to be able to create a space like that, to disseminate the information, to bring Korean experts over, and then eventually just school another generation. Because sadly, I think what happens, and I don't know if it's just Korea, but Koreans don't always, within the country, appreciate what they have until it's gone, or until it goes out, and then suddenly foreigners get really excited by it, and then they get excited. So if that's what has to happen, then I'll do it. And so hopefully in 10 years I'll be still making paper. I know if I grow the trees in the States, I know it'll be different. I mean, but the thing is, it's okay. I'm okay with that because I will always have this connection to my teacher, and I can just order the bark from Korea. And so now that I've made the connections here, I want to just keep doing that kind of work, and then also hopefully either publishing or shooting a documentary or both. So it's just about getting the information out there. I don't know how I'm going to do that and make art at the same time, but that's hopefully in 10 years I'll have figured out a way.
Well, you will do it with that attitude, I'll tell you that.
Yes, Linda.
Two questions. One, if someone was approaching this for the first time and didn't really know much about paper making, how long would it take to kind of learn the art enough to be kind of semi-competent, not a professional by any means, but yeah.
I don't know. Because I went having several years, I went with several years with a background in papermaking. And I spent a month there, and I became kind of, this is the best batch. This was the batch, this is the labor. Those are the trees that I cut down and scraped and everything. But you can still see, I purposely brought a sheet that was not perfect. You can still see the errors, but this is as good as I got in a month. So for a total novice, I think it really depends on if you're like a water baby or not, because it really is about this motion of being able to figure out how to move with the water and how, because I was fighting it for so long. This was my third batch, first 2 batches, these horrible air pockets, because I would keep on just like, and then I force it into the water, and then I'd be like, why is it making the screen go? And I was like, oh, it's like surfing. It's really like surfing. So maybe if you're a surfer, it would take you.